You probably heard that.
Good. Good to know.
Awesome. It's now noon. How are y'all feeling?
Like it's
I
1
feel like
o'clock.
it's 2 o'clock.
Well, as long as we're feeling something, we're all here. I'm really happy all of you got to join us today. My name is Lourdes Escalante. I am the program manager for Indigenous Alliance Without Borders. Today, we have 3 amazing speakers, and we also have our amazing development coordinator, Saray Argumedo. Saray, do you want to introduce yourself really quick?
Keno semilwitiwak, ika istilisli, nanotoka Saray Argumedo. Beautiful day, relatives. My name is Saray Argumedo, and it is such an honor to be here amongst these amazing folks. And thank you so much, Lourdes, for all the amazing work that you've been doing behind the scenes. It's really awesome, and happy Indigenous Peoples Day.
Thank you, Saray. Saray has also been behind the scenes helping develop our Indigenous Peoples Day commemoration through our website on indigenousalliance.org. We have a number of video submissions that you can go check out that commemorate Indigenous Peoples Day. And we also have a blessing from Jerry Carlisle, who is the San Javier District Vice Chairman. He did a beautiful blessing, absolutely beautiful. It was a sunrise blessing that he did. So you can go on our website and check that out at indigenousalliance.com. I mean, sorry, .org. .org, don't forget that. So currently we have 23 attendees. Hello, everyone. I hope you can all hear us. I hope you can all see us. I'm going to introduce our first speaker. That will be Valaura Imus-Nahsonhoya. So Valaura is from the Hopi Tribe. She has 18 years of direct victim services to crime victims, working in tribal communities, addressing victimization and trauma-informed practices. She is the executive director and founder of Honwungsi Consulting Services, and she's a CEO of Omauw Resource Center, a 501c3. She's employed with the National Criminal Justice Training Center of Fox Valley, Technical College by the OVC, OJP, and DOJ. She's a tribal liaison and a study coordinator for Arizona HB 2570, otherwise known as a study on missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and men and boys, with LeCroy and Milligan and Arizona State University, the Office of Criminal Justice and Criminology Lab. She has worked for Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Office of Justice Services Victim Assistance Program as a Supervisory Victim Specialist, and for the Department of the Interior, and for the Office of Law Enforcement and Security. She is the first victim specialist to work with the DOI, Office of Law Enforcement and Security, and crime victims served by the BIA District III. All right, so Valaura, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to you. You can share screen, and she will be presenting a PowerPoint. Valaura, there you go. All right, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, and yeah, happy Indigenous Peoples Day. It's been waking up this morning. I'm like thinking to myself, you know, what this day is about. And last night we did have what we call a clan run for Hopi. We, you know, many of us Indigenous people were connected and through clanship. So we honor our clans here in Phoenix and did a little run, and also supported Black Mesa Trust in their fight to maintain some of our cultural sites through the Little Colorado River. So that was amazing to see our Indigenous people who live in the valley and just come out and support and share who they are and where they're from. So met a lot of relatives that we did not know about. So that was amazing to be a part of. So as Lourdes mentioned, I do and have quite a bit of experience around providing direct services to crime victims, and not just women and girls, but also men and boys and our LGBTQ2S communities. And a lot of my work, since not being with the federal government, was really identifying our gaps of services for our families and survivors. Many of us are experiencing, especially adult missing persons, lack of services due to whatever it is, program requirements. We do know that a lot of our criminal jurisdictions, we find that our adult missing persons isn't a crime. So that's another lack of service. So what I want to share with you today is back in 2020, we did complete a study here in Arizona around missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And it was a two-part study. And one was with ASU School of Criminology, and the other one was with LeCroy and Milligan. So I'll be sharing that with you and just sharing a little bit of history as well. And I think this is important to share because we're all dealing with different aspects of violence of our Indigenous people, but not really understanding what is really happening within our communities. So it was very interesting throughout our study to learn a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and share here. Lourdes, you see my screen? You guys see my screen? Somebody nod.
Yes, I see it.
Okay, great. Like I mentioned, we had so many partners in this study here, and this is the team from ASU School of Criminology. We had quite a bit of individuals who were part of our team, as it required extensive scholarly reviews, and just looking at different aspects of violence against women and girls. So I'm going to share just a few areas that I felt was important as a highlight in the study. So what we did find, and this is ASU's study, is that we did find through NAMIS that it showed that 12 females and 34 males were missing as of July 25th, 2020. The age range for our women was 20 to 54. Women were missing for almost twice as long as men. Our average for our women was 21 years and our men was 12 years. So we did recognize that there were missing individuals across the state, and in particular throughout Maricopa and Navajo counties. The other area is that we looked at the murders of Arizona Indigenous women and girls were increasing, and you'll see through the graphs. I know it's hard to read, but we highlighted just a few points, and I won't necessarily read through them. And the third one is that we did find a higher number of women and girls who were missing, again, through Maricopa County. And a lot of them were, not only Native American and our Native tribes, but we were also recognizing in our border areas, our Indigenous people on the border who were missing as well, either coming into the United States or going into Mexico. So that was interesting to recognize as well. We did find that Indigenous females are killed ranging in age from infant to elder with an average age of 31 years old. So this was significant to us as far as, what were we seeing, not only nationally, but here in Arizona, utilizing all forms of data just to compile a consensus of what was actually happening. With LeCroy and Milligan, myself and Katie, we had done an extensive what we called a field study. We talked to individuals who were families and survivors of missing and murdered, and we allowed them to share their story. I did all the interviews, and my interviews lasted anywhere from 30 minutes to 5 hours. This not included just listening to their stories, giving them that opportunity and the space, but also to do crisis intervention, debriefing, or resource and referrals, because it did bring out some of that re-trauma. So we wanted to make sure that we addressed that before I hung up with them. And, you know, unfortunately, through this study, we had to do it virtually because this happened during COVID. But we were able to place on-site counselors, behavioral health services, victim services within those communities that we were interviewing. We also had to go through an extensive process through our tribes to obtain MOUs in order for us to interview tribal members living on reservation. Those members that were living off reservation, we were also able to interview them as, you know, they were living in urban settings. So I can share with you some highlights of our study here that are specific to our stories of our survivors and families. Those that we did interview 37 individuals. Many of our females, we found that 6 of them were murdered, 5 of them missing, and missing and murdered was a total of 10, and just missing cases was 6. Although this study was on women and girls, we did also have families and survivors who wanted to interview that were male and transgender. So we did not turn them away, as we felt like it was important for them to share their story, as you know, they were willing to. So for males, we found that 2 of them survivors shared, you know, that they were murdered. 1 was missing and murdered was 5. And a transgender, they had a situation where in 2 cases they were missing. We did find that the reasons why or how they went missing or murdered, a lot of them were experiencing abusive intimate partner violence. Many of them really didn't know, and those unknown were our families that were sharing these stories. We did find that the next area that rated high was the substance use and sex trafficking was the reasons why or how they were missing or murdered. It was interesting to learn that, you know, 6 out of our 8 survivors who were interviewed that were kidnapped were drugged and sex trafficked or groomed into sex trafficking. So we did find, you know, one of our theories was, is sex trafficking happening to our individuals that were missing? And we definitely did find some stories that shared that they were. So, you know, it brought the reality to many tribal members and tribal leaders that sex trafficking is happening in our communities or to our tribal members. So, you know, we were really, really happy to be able to basically prove that area that we've been talking about for so long. But I want to share a quote. This was from a survivor, and she says, what I want to share is that anyone can be kidnapped. I don't think I am pretty or have the body to be sold, or men wanting me. I am a regular Native girl, but on the internet, when they sold me, I was worth 500. As a Native young woman, not having been through a women's ceremony, now I am so scared to go anywhere. I feel very violated, and all the women in me was taken. So what she was referencing was many of our Native communities and tribes, we go through, sorry, my dog is being naughty here. I'm a little Pomeranian. And, you know, we go through womanhood ceremonies, and this particular individual wasn't able to go through that, although, you know, when she was put into trafficking, all of that is what she's talking about, is what's taken away from her. So, you know, I feel like it's important to share her story, and I appreciate her willing to continue to allow us to share her quote, because she wants it known that this is real. And this was her message to a lot of young girls as well, is, you know, it's happening and it happened to her. So that was really strong for her to share. The other area that we did also, not necessarily, okay. The other area that we found was that when family members and survivors were asked, how helpful was law enforcement for you? We did see, you know, that they were not very helpful. Whether or not, you know, a lot of them either reported or didn't report. They didn't give the resources that the families expected from them. So there was a lot of different areas in which they felt they were not helpful. Number of families and survivors referred to victim advocates. That also was an area in which many of them were not referred. They were not referred for the services. And so this lacked a lot of, you know, judicial resources for them. It lacked a lot of them learning about what the criminal justice processes were. So, you know, it may have kind of showed them that nobody was cared, nobody was interested, nobody was going to help me, you know, but, you know, this is what we found from our survivors. So these were a few highlights from our actual conversations with family and survivors, and just some highlights I want to share with you today. The other area that we did look into that was not necessarily, you know, something we originally and intending to do, but what came out, especially when I talked about the resources given by law enforcement to have an advocate assist them. And one of the areas was around victim compensation. So what victim compensation is that when an individual is a victim of crime, they may be eligible for victim compensation. That's through the state compensation program, and that's to the Arizona Criminal Justice Commission. So every victim that is a crime, is a victim of a crime, is eligible for victim services. And what it does provide is some, you know, counseling services. Families of homicide victims could apply for some funeral and burial expenses or reimbursement. And you know, we have a lot of victims who've been raped, who've been involved in domestic violence situations, to where possibly, you know, mattresses were destroyed. You know, so those are some areas that they could assist in reimbursing to our families. So we did, you know, find that many of our tribal communities were not quite too familiar of the processes or how to advocate for our victims and survivors and our families. So what we did find through the study, and appreciate the Criminal Justice Commission for sharing a lot of their data for us to summarize. But we did find that a majority of the applications came from Maricopa County, followed by Coconino and Pinal County. We did find that 36% of these applications were white Caucasian, and only 7% of the applications were American Indian Alaska Native. So that's a small portion of our cases going before victim comp. And the other area is that there within a 2 years time span, they had 95 female applications, 58 female applications. Coconino, Apache, Maricopa, you know, they had a little bit of the higher applications coming before them as well within this actual group. And we had, with our Indigenous population, we had 88% of these applications that were approved for our females. For our males, 91% were approved. And some of the denials were due to the commission of the crime, the contributory conduct, failure to report within 72 hours, and that's filing a report with law enforcement, and ineligible applications or unwilling to aid additional information or do the processes. The next slide, although, American Indians represent only 7% of the application, they may not know about the program or what they're able to request compensation for. And it's important to further explore our American Indian knowledge of the victims' compensation program and their access to it. And also, there was a surprising finding in this data that the second largest amount of payments was made by Navajo County, even though they represent 2 applications. This suggests that even though a county may only have a few applications, they may be making several payments to these individuals based on the compensation that they requested. So this is just some data that we want to share with you as well in regards to some of the numbers that we found around victim compensation. This final table displays the crimes that our American Indian applicant experienced and or requested compensation for by gender. For women specifically, the majority of applicants requested compensation for assault. Next is child sexual abuse, then homicide and sexual assault. So this highlights that the violence that impacts Native women in the state, and also for men, the majority of applicants requested compensation was for homicide, followed by child sexual abuse and assault and vehicular manslaughter. So, the table shows that there are similarities in the types of crimes experienced or applied by both American Indian women and men. So lastly, I'll share this through chat as well, or I'll give it to Lourdes so she can share. But this was a historical moment for us, as in 2019, Representative Germain, former Representative Winona Benali, were the spearheads of getting this bill written, and then bringing on other legislatures to support this bill. But the first hearing that we had to present this bill, there was only 5 of us, and we waited over 10 hours just to be heard at legislation to get this bill passed. And through time, we just encourage a lot of men and women to support this bill, our tribal leaders, and when it got signed, we were all able to be present as well. So this is really historic and momentous for us. Currently, we are moving forward through another bill. It's HB 2099, and we've made some modifications to this bill to strengthen what we want to do, and making sure that the recommendations of the 2020 study that we implement in this current bill to be able to move forward as far as strengthening organizations, or just bringing this awareness about our Indigenous people who are experiencing violence. We also changed the title to MMIWG to MMIP, which is people, which will include our men and boys, our trans and our LGBTQ2S population as well in this study. Through ASU Criminology, School of Criminology and their lab, we are and have begun the study, and we're focusing on our college students who may have experienced this type of violence, whether it's through their family or themselves. So we're currently doing this study, and the population is our college students. So we're excited. We're preparing to move forward and learning more from our families and our victims and our survivors. So, they have the opportunity to share their experiences. And without these stories, without this data, we're not able to do you know, we talk about systems, you know, and we have to strengthen these systems. We have to get our criminal justice to support our families, you know, but for the most part, and the work that I do working with our families is, you know, I like to use this information to also share with my survivors and families that you're not the only one. You're not the only one experiencing these type of violence and this type of victimization, you know, because we're now talking about it. You know, years ago, you know, we didn't talk about our crimes. We didn't talk about our victimization, and we held it in us, resulting in further trauma. And, you know, I see it in my own family. I see substance abuse. I see violence still occurring within our families. But these are things we need to start talking about. So I appreciate your time and me sharing the information that I provided. So I don't know, Lourdes, if you want me to answer any questions or wait till the end.
Thank you, Valaura. Since your topic is pretty fresh on everyone's minds, I want to quickly, there is a question from Carolyn. She wants to know from the survivors you researched, were the perpetrators Native or were they white or were they another race? What was essentially what were the perpetrators? Were they Native or white?
Non-Indigenous.
Non-Indigenous, there you go. Thank you, Marley.
Thank you for the question. So in this study, the perpetrators were 50-50. So with my consulting firm, I do have a missing persons trafficking recovery team. And what that data shows is that it's non-natives who are going into our communities, developing relationships with our girls and our families, and having children, getting married, getting to know their families. But within time, you know, they are taking our girls off reservation. And even in the study, they've shared with us that, you know, the grooming part and taking them off reservation and putting them into sex trafficking, you know, and also aside from that, the girls that we've been looking for within our missing persons team, that's the same story, you know, and it's because our poverty of, you know, our families who are not strong in keeping us together because of alcohol, substance abuse, and violence, you know, and many of us want to leave because we want to get away from that. So if somebody's going to love us and show us that, you know, they can take care of us, you know, we're going to fall to that. That's the vulnerability, right? So, you know, we want to be able to, you know, minimize this by providing this education, by talking about these realities that's happening. But, you know, I have to say, in my experiences and what I'm hearing from my families, you know, it's about 50-50. But with, again, you know, with the work that I do in our recovery team, a majority of them are non-native, so who are perpetrators. And some, the lack of jurisdiction, you know, many tribes were not able to prosecute non-natives yet. So, you know, that's been a big area that we still have a challenge. So thank you.
Thank you. We're gonna go ahead and move on to our other panelists because we have a video we also want to include after introducing him. So let's welcome Dr. Cintli. Dr. Cintli was born in Mexico. He was raised in East Los Angeles. He received his bachelor's at UCLA in 1976 and his master's and PhD at the University of Wisconsin at Madison in 2005 and 2008. A longtime award-winning writer, he has written for many publications, including being a nationally syndicated columnist for 12 years with First, Chronicle Features, and then Universal Press Syndicate through 1994 until 2006. His previous books are Sacred Maize is Our Mother, Indigeneity and Belonging in the Americas, which was published in 2014, and another book, Yolki, A Warrior Summoned from the Spirit World, Testimonios on Violence, published in 2019, were published by the UVA Press. The third book of his trilogy, Smiling Brown, People, the Color of the Earth, will be published soon. His writings, 50 Years Más o Menos Amongst the Gringos, published by Aslan Press, is a compilation of his nearly 50 years of writing, was recently published, very, very recently. I think that was maybe last month. He is also a columnist through the UCLA It Starts With La Gente. Dr. Cintli? All right, can we hear you, Dr. Cintli?
Yeah, that's
Awesome.
yeah. Okay, well, I'll try and be as brief as possible. Let me see the time, 2:31. Okay, I'll try and stop at 2:45.
Yeah, do you want me to present your video first or afterwards?
Well, I'm thinking we should skip it because we got limited time now. So, but I'm gonna cover what's in the video regardless.
Okay,
What's in the video was a documentary that one of our board members or somebody we work with at Indigenous Alliance, Juanita Lopez, did. And it's about the Native women from the South, in particular Maya women who have gone, or rather either killed or have died in detention. The biggest case that most of us know of is somebody by the name of Claudia Patricia Gomez Gonzalez, who was killed by a border patrolman. I think it was 2018, shot in the head from not too far away. The other cases that we know of are mostly women, Maya women, that were killed or died in detention. I don't know if there was a coincidence involved there, but there are definitely language issues, which is what Juanita covers. Yeah, a lot of times there's needs, and if they can't communicate, they think that that there's something wrong with them mentally, or they just ignore their needs. And so that's what accounts for those number of deaths. And, Guatemaltecos are not a huge population relative to all the migrants coming in, and they're the ones dying, Anyway, that was one topic I wanted to cover, but the second one has to do with a study that a number of people were part of. I recruited about 50 people across the country because I myself am a survivor of violence from 1979. Yeah, and I won both my trials. I was almost killed, etc. So I've always maintained that interest. And when Michael Brown was killed in 2014, what I noticed is the dialogue in the country was very black and white, pretty much standard for all topics, all issues. And so I decided to start tracking and start looking at all the databases. And what I found is that peoples are miscategorized. And because again, when you have a society that focuses on black and white, everybody's either black or white, which of course means indigenous peoples and people of Mexican, Central American descent, they're pretty much also somehow in some kind of twilight zone and do end up in other categories like unknown, even the white category, the other category. And what I determined after doing some research is that at least there was about a 1/3 undercount. In fact, I would like to read, let me see if I don't lose it here. Yeah, I'm gonna read you the statistics, from the initial statistics. And so what we did is we looked at databases going back to the year 2000 and found that over about 34,000 people have been killed by law enforcement. And I think the general public, if they're very good at keeping up with the news, they may know of 100 cases, from 2000 to the present. So most cases are not known by most everybody. But if they do know them, they might be like the Rodney King type cases, Michael Brown, George Floyd, but on the whole, most of these cases are anonymous. So anyway, so let's see, 60% of all the cases are of people of color, and it's the reverse in terms of the population. That is 40% of the people, 40% of this country is people of color, 60% white, but yet the numbers are reversed when it comes to killings. Personally, I think there should be zero on both ends, you know. In other words, there is no acceptable or proportion. It's like if say 1,000 people are killed and then saying, oh, well, they're killed by proportion and then they're okay. No, people shouldn't be getting killed at any proportion. That's important to know. But now actual numbers, to me, I compare them to wartime numbers. There were 6,600 Black peoples killed by law enforcement between 2000 to the present. 5,700 of Mexican Central American descent, and then 3,000 Asian, which surprised me completely. And part of the final study, we're dealing with that. And then 500 Native peoples. It may sound counterintuitive for some people, but Native peoples are at the highest rate in the country. And that's always, you know, it's always been the case. In fact, I should have started by saying in my research from 79 to the present and going back, I am of the belief that we're talking about the same violence from 1492 to the present. It just takes on different forms, whether it's military, whether it's lynchings and on and on and on. It's the same thing. And then there's no accident that these three groups are at the highest rates all the time. Again, Indigenous, Black, and Brown. Now, one thing that most people, well, I guess nobody knew, what we unearthed in our work in the databases is there were 6,000 people that were unidentified. What we've done this research in terms of the 6,000, and people are, maybe they'll be surprised. I wasn't surprised. Most of those 6,000 are people of color. And absolutely, they're either Native or I use the word raza or brown. And again, it's all that misidentification is taking place. One thing that's important to know, and you know, the work that I do is those three groups. And of course, I do more work on Indigenous and the brown populations because those are the ones that are ignored in the media. One thing I can say is that there is no issue here about racial profiling or accident. It's not accidental. There's absolutely racial profiling at work here. Question is, what is the racial profile? You know, when they kill Mexicans or Central Americans, the question is, what is the profile? The profile obviously is not blonde and blue-eyed, somebody from Spain, etc., or Argentina. It is the Mexican and Central American population that fits the Indigenous profile that we are used to associating with the Americas. You know, so you're talking about people that are brown, you know, black hair, black eyes, brown eyes, and so that's pretty much the profile. What I wanted to, I know, let me see the time real quick. Yeah, because time flies. One of the things that I did, as I mentioned, with the study is part of it was triggered by my own research, and you might be able to see it. Let me see this particular book right here, and that was published in 2019, and it's called Yolki. One of the things that I found, I mentioned earlier, is that when you look at the categories of other, unknown, and unidentified, it's like, well, it's another word for disappearance. These are peoples that are being disappeared and therefore nobody pays attention to. One thing that I should add too is very important is that, you know, when I was doing all this research, I thought, well, you know, these are different topics, you know, like Native peoples have this situation, Black peoples have this situation, and brown peoples have another situation, and on and on. But, you know, and then of course, murdered and missing Indigenous women. I thought all these are separate topics, but the reality is no, they're all actually linked. But you know how, you know, the link is, it's not the law enforcement that's the link or the vigilante violence. It's at the judicial, what do you call it? Well, that's where the link is, in the judiciary. That is, and I think maybe Valaura may be able to, and both Marty may be able to comment on this, is that very few cases are investigated fully and independently, and very few result in convictions. Same thing with these violences that I'm talking about, the police violence, the 34,000 cases, very few cases are prosecuted. So the question is, what is the link? That's the link. In other words, the dehumanization, that is the link. People of color are not considered human or human enough to investigate. whether it's murdered and missing women, whether it's immigration, whether it's the police, and on and on and on. So those are the highlights, so to speak. I have let me see, I have a few notes here too I wanted to add. No, and actually I went through pretty much the whole thing. What I have in my book, yeah, because yeah, it's just about 5 more minutes. One of the things that I did in my book is I actually not only chronicled and documented, but got stories from the different peoples. And I have, let me see, and I'll just read a few names because it'll take too long to go through each case. But let's see, on the killings of Native peoples, we have Alan Locke in 2014. He had just gone to a Native Lives Matter rally, and he was killed the next day by police. In South Dakota, there was a Rosebud girl that was killed, tasered. There was a woman that was in 2013. In 2014, there was a case of Christina Tahawa. Well, she was singing Comanche songs in prison or in jail, and they killed her. There was the case out of Sandpoint, Idaho, Janetta Riley. She was seeking medical assistance. And again, she had mental issues. And again, she was killed within seconds. That's the commonality. The other commonality is that people of color are considered threats. Doesn't matter if they're men or women. Most of the cases are men, but it doesn't matter in terms of law enforcement. Like we all remember Tamir Rice. I mean, within seconds, you know? That was Janetta Riley also. Within seconds, boom, they're killed. Whereas if you have a white serial killer or somebody that's violent, like you probably remember the case of God, what was his name? Rittenbar. That guy, he shot people and walked right past the police with his rifle. They didn't even do anything to him. That other guy from Dylan Roof kills 9 African Americans, and they give them a Burger King. You know, I don't think they have Happy Meals there with a Burger King, but they gave them a meal. So that's the difference, is that you absolutely have disparate treatment. You know, of the study that we conducted, again, it was about 50 people around the country. It's much more violent than we thought. One of the things that we're actually ready to put out the final study. We're probably just a couple of weeks from doing that. And it's not very different from the initial study. The difference is that the numbers are bigger from what I was about those 6,000 that we're missing. Yeah, so it's going to add to people of color, but again, no surprise there, because that's who's actually getting killed. And I hate to use the word disproportionately, because there should be no proportion that's correct or good. We shouldn't be satisfied with like, oh, we're 20% of the population, so we should be killed at 20% of the rate. Shouldn't work that way either. Anyway, I think that's, yeah, again, I try to be as fast as I can. We do have a study, the initial study that's ready. But the other one, we will post it on I imagine we can post it on our page when it's out. And again, that'll be probably November 2nd. And because I think we were planning with the Dia de los Muertos, you know, Day of the Dead, to coincide with that. I don't know if, I know I was short on the cases. I should add one other case. No, yeah, well, one was the great grandson of Chief Joseph. You know, he was killed with a cell phone. And unfortunately, what a lot of people don't know is that for an officer to get away, all they have to do is say they were afraid. You know, that's all that's required. So when the great grandson of Chief Joseph was killed, the officer said, well, I saw what appeared to be a shining object, and therefore, you know, that was justification. Now think about the ramifications of that. Everybody has a cell phone today, you know? In the old days, they used to have to plant a fake, you know, somebody else's gun, you know, put it on the ground and say, oh, well, he had a gun. They don't even do that anymore. I did want to mention one other case that typifies that. This was a case out of Bakersfield, Francisco Serna. He was 73 years old, and they shot him on the spot, you know? It's a longer story, but they shot him on the spot, and in his hand was a crucifix, you know? So like, you know, before, again, it was, oh, the guy had an Uzi, you know? Now it's a crucifix or a cell phone, you know, or a garden hose. Anyway, so you can imagine it's a huge topic. but that's a little glimpse of the study that we've conducted.
Absolutely. It is a huge topic because we're on a huge land base, right? And then we have borders, these superficial government borders that are dividing us. But at the same time, this issue exists on either side of the border. I have a question, but I'm gonna save it until after we introduce Marley.
Sure.
Marley, hello.
Hello.
Yate.
Oh, yeah, A.
Marley, I'm going to quickly just, I'm going to quickly go through your bio. I'm introducing Marley Shebala. She's the Inashiwi, otherwise known as Navajo and Zuni. She has a website, Marley Shebala's Notebook. That's her current business where she provides current news coverage of the Navajo government and Navajo communities on and off the reservation. She also produces a Navajo Nation environmental news and political analysis of the Navajo government and legislative process. So Marley is a busy person, but we appreciate you. We appreciate having you here. And if you don't mind, do you have any questions for Valaura or for Dr. Cintli? How would you like to proceed? And I'll leave it up to you, Marley.
Okay. Yeah, Marley Shebala yin shia Twahekli Shron Anastasia Danet Bushishim. And I introduced myself the way that I was taught and also out of respect for who I am. And I said, my label is Marley Shebala, but who I am is my mother's clan and my grandmother on great grandmother. And that's where the waters come together. And my father, who I'm born for, and that's what I said, is Zuni, and my clan is Frog. So I'm water and frog. And and listening to both of the presenters, and as a person in the media, and this information is very important, but there's a real lack of getting it out to the grassroots people. Those individuals who need it, those ones that probably have cell phones that have been given to them by social service, who may not even have a radio in their home. They might not even have a home. If they do have a home, it's probably pretty much, there's a lot of violence in that home. And in reading the stories, news reports of the missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, one thing that goes through all of them is what I heard today, is that they run away. They're looking for family. And that reality is what all of us on Indigenous Day, we're Indigenous 24/7. And we need to remember that, right, we need to walk that talk. And that talk is our way of life as Indigenous people. And I know the way of life as I was taught as Diné, and still learning Oshawi, but making that effort, and what it means is it's not like what you would see with the priests and nuns or even the monks, where they talk about they're in prayer, but we are in prayer. I'm in prayer now. Before preparing for this, I prayed that, the sacred holy beings would guide me, what I had to say. And I thought about this ever since I was asked to be a part of your presentation. And I'm really honored to do that, because that helps me to give voice to the voices that I've heard for more than 33 years here on the Navajo Nation. And those voices also include elected officials, politicians, Navajo politicians. And we have to make that clear. So understanding that we have almost, in a sense, lost communication with our own government. And the direct services that are needed that I'm hearing, because this has been happening since 1492, you know, so we should have a solution by now, don't you think? And in looking at those solutions, it comes down to family, each one of us, how we raise our families. Every single one of us as Indigenous people have to raise our families so that there is that respect, that our children won't be running away into somewhere else looking for love, looking for a family. I mean, that's what we talk about as Indigenous people, is family, how strong we are in that, how strong we are in our language, how strong we are in our way of life. Yet the reality is we don't. 50% of the perpetrators of these violent crimes are our own Indigenous people, on Indigenous people. And the services are out there. I have written about them for 34 years. There are solutions. At Navajo County, they set up a domestic violence team where it included the children. They brought along stuffed animals. There was a counselor. There was law enforcement, child services, social services. I can't remember what other agency was there, but they would, in responding to a call, they would all go. And when they got there, they would immediately start tape recording the victim. So if the victim recanted and said, oh, you know, I don't want to press charges, which is usual, the law enforcement, the state, the county, the tribe should be able to step in and protect the victim. And so immediately there are those resources there. And with all of this money that is being brought into the communities, the American Rescue Plan money, there needs to be a push everywhere for those direct services to be done within tribal communities, not on the fringe. Don't allow the border towns to pull those services into the border towns where then they can, you know, it almost becomes a money-making machine, you know? And those services need to stay on the on tribal lands, because there are no vehicles, there's no public transportation, there's no cell coverage out. We all heard about it when we heard about the response to COVID. So begin, you know, plugging those holes for real services, direct services, not funding a government and letting it trickle down, but funding those nonprofits that have been out there since forever, you know, working despite lack of funding. Here on the Navajo Nation, there are 2 shelters. The president, the executive branch, President Nez and Vice President Lizer, have not funded shelters. They gave them such a hard time last year. It was terrible. But what do you see in the news? Oh, hey, there he is, you know, signing something with Biden, you know, to do with Bears Ears. You know, he's appointed the First Lady to be part of the task force dealing with domestic violence. But you have individuals that have been in the trenches years and years. And that's really working with the community and translating these studies, these books into Indigenous language, because so many of our people are not into reading. You know, they're not going to read the studies. I see it at the Navajo Nation Council, and where I've covered Navajo government, where I've covered any government. You give them a study, they look at it, they nod their head, and there it goes into where? How many studies have been done of Indigenous people in this land? You know, I've read them over and over and over again. Let's take action. Let's get together as a family after we leave here. Go have dinner with your family. Sit down. See what's happening with your family. Take care of your family. Have respect for your marriage vows. You know, that's what taking care of your family is. Taking care of your children, your grandchildren, really doing, taking care of the earth, you know, promoting that, you know, and helping people to understand these studies because they're important. I love that study that was presented, both of your studies. They were fantastic. That's history and that needs to be taught. And I believe in that very much. So again, I want to say, you know, Asheha for inviting me on here. And if I said anything that may have offended anyone or may sounded disrespectful, that wasn't what I meant to do. Asheha.
Thank you, Marley. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to pose a question that each of you can answer. So the question comes from Daisy Resedis. The question is, do you think that incorporating the idea of femicide could help with bringing justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women? Valaura, do you want to answer that first?
Yes, Princess did. Gosh, I guess in the work that we do, yes, I totally agree that you know, incorporating the idea of femicide to the issue that we're dealing with. I think about our ancestors and you know what they went through, and even in my tribe, I'm Hopi, and you know, in recent years, just learning about our own migration within our clanship, you know, and what our women went through, and hearing the stories of our survivors and our family of what they're going through as well, you know, and the word femicide, you know, was brought up through discussion. We had a lot of individuals who were separated with the word itself because, you know, we think about genocide and that's what kept coming about. You know, is this about genocide? And then we brought in the term femicide. You know, is this what that connection is? I have to agree that in some parts, you know, yes, because the stories of our survivors that they're sharing is the words that they remember, calling them names, telling us we're worthless, telling us that, you know, we don't mean nothing. But the reality in it is that through our stories, you know, women, we give birth, you know, and we have a huge role. And in speaking about violence and you know, just my own self-concept is that majority of our perpetrators are male. We do have female perpetrators. A majority of our victims are females. We do have male victims as well. However, is that in our cultures, we have to have both identities, male and female, in order for us to sustain our people, right? So, you know, I have to say that it's the federal government that is part of this genocide, whether we want to call it femicide, because we're not providing not only the resources that we need. For example, you know, with our missing and murdered Indigenous people, the resources that we need is within our law. We don't have missing persons as an adult, a law. So who do they go for help? Nobody. We come to our community. We're grassroots. We're doing this grassroots. So that's just one example that I can share in my opinion regarding the question and, you know, with what I know about the issue. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Yes, there have been accounts, especially in Mexico, of femicide. You know, Just for those of you attendees that don't know the definition of femicide, if that's a term that is new to you, it is the killing of a woman or girl, in particular by a man and on account of her gender. That is what femicide is. With that, Dr. Cintli, I know that you have particularly some knowledge with femicide or the occurrences of femicide in Mexico and in Central America. Do you want to chime in?
Well, just briefly, it's probably worldwide, but specifically on this continent, Mexico and Central America, and I know especially Guatemala, they've dealt with this probably a good, probably 30, 40 years. No, there's not a new topic. It's something very real, across the continent. And so there's absolutely a connection, whether people have made the links, but there is. I mean, it's very real. Yeah. So I don't know if Marley wants to add something to that.
Definitely, it's femicide, and in looking at the indigenous community, or even just globally, when you're dealing with conquest, that was it was just publicly. It was almost a military order: go out and rape, and pillage, scorch and burn. And so yeah, definitely it was femicide, and they were, government funded femicide. And that has to be looked at, because right now we're coming up on Halloween, and you see the stereotype Pocahontas outfit, which, it promotes this idea of just sex, nothing about respect, love, that, anything dealing with, how you conduct yourself as a human being, not just as a male and a female, but as a human being. And so in those actions that started in 1492, you can go through the history books, and it's there. It's an order, a military order. So, and then it just, and that was based on genocide, the women, it was admitted, yes, we have the children, we take care of them, we give birth to them, and it just goes back into that, the woman as a rape victim, as a victim of violence, a missing murdered. That's a mother. That's a mother that in 1492 that they were killing. Pregnant women. And there's a whole history there. And that mentality, that thought, is also something that I was talking about, as far as how we think of ourselves as Indigenous, how we conduct ourselves, so that our people are safe, that they're protected. Since 1492, we should be able to protect ourselves. We shouldn't be relying on the ones that are committing, that have committed that femicide and genocide.
With that, I have one question, because I want to tie it into the topic, the overall topic of this panel. So Indigenous women are seen as a particular threat. Those that carry life are seen as a particular threat.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts when tracing the structural violence of Indigenous peoples since 1492? What are your thoughts on Indigenous women and tracing that structural violence? And anyone can chime in. I'm not going to pick anyone. I know it's kind of like a really heavy answer, because we can talk about it, all day.
Well, I was waiting, but go ahead, Marty.
No, I was just wanting a more clarification of the question.
Yeah.
Dr. Cintli?
Sure. Well, I think the question answers itself. Yeah. If you can repeat the question, that way the listeners.
How would you tie in the statement that Indigenous women are seen as a particular threat to our overall topic, tracing the structural
Right.
violence of Indigenous
Right.
people since 1492.
Yeah. Well, see, if you understand 1492, we know that the whole idea was to replace, right? They even call it replacement theory even to this day. You know, it was to replace, you know, or to eliminate, you know, or to assimilate, you know. And so women represent, you know, that the life. But also, see, the other idea that goes with it is the idea of being in the way, you know. In other words, Native peoples are in the way because we're here. And so they got to get rid of us one way or another, you know. That's why you see colonialism. You have different aspects of it throughout the continent. In the South, you have more people that are assimilated as opposed to, well, of course, we got eliminated too, because you're talking about genocide, heavy duty genocide. There was one thing I wanted to add, because I might forget later. And so if I may, because I saw a note that somebody put on there. And that is, if all of you remember that the killing of 23 Mexican peoples in El Paso, I believe that was 2018, you know, remember we were talking about the commonalities of all these different killings. They all seem different, you know, one's government, one's vigilantes, well, the one in El Paso was one of those right-wing supremacists that was literally listening to the president, you know. He went down to the border looking for Mexicans, you know. So
Oh, yeah.
I think it was you, Lourdes, who mentioned this, that the white guy that did that, he couldn't tell the difference between a Mexican American or a Mexican citizen of Mexico. And that's the way it is in this country. It doesn't matter. The point is, the guy killed, half the people killed were from Mexico, the other half were from El Paso. And that's what I meant about the racial profiling. Whether it's law enforcement or vigilantes, to them, they see a brown face, you know, that's who the enemy is. That's who's in the way. Same idea of this question, you know, we're in the way and they got to get rid of us. That's the way they think.
It also comes from their upbringing, because you look at what was going on in Europe before they came over here on the boats, and what was happening in Europe, in England, was the feudal system, you know, and that feudal system allowed, you know, the top dog or whatever you want to call him to go and do whatever he wanted, you know, with the land and the people that were on it. And they obviously were not, I don't know if they ever had their own puberty ceremonies for their males and females about respect, you know, that you just don't go over and take somebody's wife just to have sex with her, you know, not even take care of them, do no compensation. It was a rape, but it was, you know, put in the correct legal words, just like, you know, slavery was once legal. Bounties on our people, Indigenous people, was legal, you know, rounding us up and taking us down, that was legal. But, you know, we can't depend on laws, you know, to solve these issues that we're dealing with, because they are dealing with thoughts. They're dealing with morality. It's dealing with a history of behavior that we have to look at in Europe. If anyone should study anything on what you're talking about, it's a study that has to be done of where did this thinking come from, that women are just completely sex objects. You know, I watch these movies from like the 40s and the 20s and look at the way that the movie is advertised. And you have women scantily clad, women who are like trying to push away the guy, and then all of a sudden they succumb to the guy, you know, and that's supposed to be romantic, but that's rape, you know. And so it continues this promotion of not just Indigenous women, but that was what was placed on us from the beginning with the doctrine of discovery. You have to go back to the doctrine of discovery, you know, and look at that. And it's so deeply, it's there. It just underlies everything. This deep-seated idea that continues with the rich, you know, that somehow there are different classes within the US in this document, democracy, which is why you have these ridiculous tax laws. You know, that's what I'm talking about. There are just this thought that because you have more money, or maybe you have more degrees, or you're wearing the latest style or whatever. You know, those are things that I'm talking about when I'm talking about family. Decolonizing our families, our men, our women.
Thank you, Marley. Valaura?
Yeah, I just want to quickly say that, you know, historically, what we've gone through as Indigenous people, just to sum this up for, you know, is they'll never get rid of us. Women are leading, women are standing, we're rising, we're taking the lead in a lot of areas. And, you know, I praise every woman who has worked hard to be where they are today. And I feel like it's strengthening us a lot in our what we've experienced historically. And again, violence, you know, has happened forever, but we're beginning to see language and literature of the reality of what has happened to our people. In particular, you know, it's October, it's gonna be Halloween, you know, and all of these customs of our Indigenous people that people are wearing, but not knowing actually what they experience. You know, polite as well, but you know, we're not going to be replaced as long as we continue to provide education and awareness about who we are, our lineages, you know, as Indigenous women. You know, the government has failed in trying to, you know, get rid of us. So, you know, there's so much to talk about, like you said, Lourdes, around this topic, but I just want to say we continue to rise.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Cintli, do you have any closing words? We are running out of time. I would appreciate everyone, you know, if we can give a few minutes.
Sure.
Words.
Yes, I think I used the word assimilation a little while ago. And what I actually meant, because it's part of that, but it's also what we call Christianization. You see, that was very effective in the South, you know, probably the whole continent, but that is something very real. And some of us grew up that way. But on top of that, there's something else separate from not knowing that you're Native, you know, not knowing that you're Indigenous, and that is becoming anti-Indigenous. That's what was brought to this continent. So the peoples, I mean, like I say, some of us survive in body, you know, in flesh. But if the mind, you know, has us thinking like the opposite, all of a sudden we look at the mirror and hate ourselves. And that's a lot of the work that I've always done, you know, in my work, because, you know, when I'm here now in Mexico, my family's from here, and the phenomena is not in the US only. The phenomena is over here too. You know, we're all of a sudden, we're the foreigners, you know, we're from here. We've never been to Europe. Actually, I went once, but anyway, the point is, you know, we're from here, and yet they got us convinced of the opposite. They're the Native peoples. They're the ones with the legal right to be here, and we're the ones that are somehow encroaching upon them. That's why they have to get rid of us. And like I said, you don't have to get rid of people physically. You can do it spiritually. You can do it psychologically, et cetera, et cetera. And I think one of the things that we see, that it's relentless, is never let up. When I studied from 79, I wanted to find out, when did it start? You know, because now it's from the present to 79. But in 79, I started looking at, well, what about in the other direction? And that's when came across cases like Bloody Christmas, Zoot Suit riots, the Sleepy Lagoon, the lynchings, and on and on and on. And I was like, wait a minute, it never was good, you know, for Native peoples, for Mexican peoples, for Black peoples. You know, it's never been, you know, what is it, those songs that we sing, you know, and justice for all and all that stuff. Never for us, you know. Anyway, so that's what I wanted to leave with, just to reiterate what Valaura said. That is, you know, no matter what they've done, you know, it's like that expression we have here in the South. They tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. And that other one is that they came for our souls, but they didn't know where to look. So I think that's how we continue to fight. And thank to my co-panelists for your words and everybody at Indigenous Alliance. Thank you. I got to run in a second, but I'll probably black out in a second. My screen.
Okay, I didn't want you to black out.
My screen will black out.
Okay, all right, Roberto. All right, Roberto. Well, I want to say a yeah too for inviting me, and it's good to see Roberto and all of you and meet some new friends. And it's good, that we end on a positive note. That's what kept us all going, no matter what we've gone through, to be positive. And, our teaching is to get up, at dawn and go out and make our prayers. And at that time, it's a positive time, a real positive, powerful time. And, to go and pray. And then in the evenings, we're also taught the same thing. And to be with our families. And if you're with your families, like I said, you're keeping track of them, telling them how to be protected. And we're thankful that we still have our ceremonies, our protection ceremonies, our blessing way ceremonies, and we have great belief in that. And we need support in keeping what little bit of our homeland here we have here in the US, but we never recognized, the borders. There were no borders for us. And we understand our relatives. We went to go visit them years ago, and that's why they'll see traces of us there, and they'll see traces of our relatives here. And even when we went up north and across the Bering Strait, but we didn't go, in conquest or to find spices or to find slaves. We said, let's go over there and see what our relatives are doing. So let's all be relatives. May peace prevail on Mother Earth. Ako Annette. Yeah.
Yeah. Valaura, do you have any closing words?
I just want to say thank you for allowing me to share our study and just a little bit about what we do here in Phoenix and for our Indigenous people. So you do have my email address if anybody wants to reach out, and just thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone. Chokotesya.
Okay.
Chokotesya is thank you in Yaqui. I really appreciate it. Sarai, do you have any closing words?
This was so beautiful and so empowering. Thank you so much. Tlazokamati.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you that are still on, if you want to go to indigenousalliance.org, we have submissions of pre-recorded videos. We have songs. We have a little bit of poetry. We have our blessings. And we also have the registration for the movie we will be showing later tonight at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we will also have a live panel afterwards. Other than that, thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your Monday. And thank you for joining us on Indigenous Peoples Day. Take care. Thank you.